A very good evening. Thank you for joining us here on this Tuesday. You're watching India Tonight. I'm Nivedna Prabhu, and like always, joining me is my colleague Sumita Kareed. Tonight, we put the spotlight on the fact that US President Donald Trump's latest remarks is under the spotlight again. In fact, speaking at the White House, Trump called US-China ties very important, welcomed the prospect of 6 lakh Chinese students, and claimed America was making a lot of money from tariffs on China. But the comments have sparked outrage among his MAGA base, which has long viewed Chinese students and immigration with suspicion. So quite interesting turn of events that's happening, Sumita.
In fact, at the same time, Washington is tightening the news on India. The Department of Homeland Security has issued a draft notification to impose an additional 25% tariff on Indian imports starting August 27th, which essentially means in just a couple of hours, these tariffs will kick in. This is essentially on top of duties which are already in place, citing a New Delhi's purchase of Russian oil. Now, this is contrasting, given the fact that Trump is striking conciliatory note on China while hitting India with new trade penalties. And that's something, Nivedna, that we discuss with our guests tonight on India Tonight. In fact, joining us on the broadcast is Jonah Blank, American author and journalist, and also Dr. Monish Thoringbam. He's a senior research consultant at Chintan Research Foundation. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now. Let me come to you first, Mr. Blank. Now, India has put up a balancing act so far, but now that stance has changed into a more firm stance that there will be no compromise on domestic interest and strategic autonomy as far as India's energy security is concerned. And you may have seen that also being echoed by top political leaders in the country. So how do you think the Trump administration currently is looking at this tone and tenor from India? Did Donald Trump anticipate this?
Well, thank you for having me. The thing to understand about Donald Trump is that he is a bully. And like all bullies, he does not respect his victims. Anyone who capitulates to him just gets more abuse. So in my opinion, India is doing the right thing by standing up to him, because that's how you deal with a bully. We've seen that Donald Trump claims that he is putting these very high crushing tariffs on India in order to punish Russia. And yet Russia has 1/2 the tariffs that Donald Trump has inflicted on India.
Jonah, as you point that out, you've also previously written, with wit, for sure, about Trump's unpredictable ways and have been very vocal about the bully aspect as well. But let me ask you this. In an election year, pitching two very different messages, tariffs on Indian exports to quote the Rust Belt voters and a student visa bonanza to please US universities. Is this, in a sense, classic Trump triangulation that we're seeing?
I don't think it's triangulation. Trump doesn't triangulate. He just does whatever makes him personally feel good. Why is he letting 600,000 Chinese students into the US? Because China is refusing to be bullied. Bullies don't go after strong targets. He doesn't care about American universities. He's not doing this for American universities. He's doing this because he's trying to reach a trade deal with China, and China is standing up to him.
Absolutely, Mr. Jonah, you made a very, very pertinent point about the fact that China is standing up to Donald Trump. India has also stood up to Donald Trump. So has Russia. And of course, some other leaders of the world are also towing that line as well, including Brazil. So remains to be seen how soon a deal or, talks again begin between India and the United States, because India has maintained a very firm stance. In fact, we'll come to that point in just a bit. Let me go to Dr. Monish. If you could also perhaps throw some light on the fact that this, tariff of 50%, it starts kicking in from tomorrow, and economists say that this is going to be a challenge for the Indian economy, although not such a significant one for India's growth. How soon do you see talks getting scheduled between India and the United States, or do you expect a protracted period of no talks happening and perhaps just some pain for Indian exporters?
So, I think, we stand at a very inflection point in the relationship as such. And I think it's very, it's important to note that besides India, Brazil has one of the highest tariffs slapped on it. Russia anyway is under sanctions from the Americans, right? China, anyway, there, as has been mentioned quite a lot, there is a trade truce. So as my previous panelist said, this is really a case also of, the symmetry and asymmetry, the trade volumes. The Chinese trade volume is almost like 5 times of the India-US trade volume. So that numbers speak for itself in terms of the the kind of different approaches that the Trump administration is having towards both India and China. So it kind of sends out one message very clearly, which is that India needs to really work on a sober preparedness in terms of improving its economic indices with a long view, not just in terms of dealing with Trump's tariff. Because, given the kind of the dynamism of the relationship of any kind and the ups and downs, I think this kind of low point we can see at any point of time. So I think the point for India is not really, of course, there is this case of trying to get on the negotiating table to negotiate to protect and promote India's interests, but it's also there is a sense of a long view here. How do we protect our interests with the long view? How do we prepare for the long view? I think Trump administration, or Trump rather, is really unhappy with the BRICS summit that Modi and the Brazilian president attended. You remember that neither Xi Jinping came to the Rio summit, nor Vladimir Putin came to the Rio summit. So I think the de-dollarization point, which India anyway has refuted before, also there is a sense of here of Trump's uneasiness with the BRICS summit and the kind of stand that the BRICS countries are taking. But I need to also point out that the West is not only the United States. We also have a UK-India trade deal. We are also negotiating with the European Union. So I think India is ready to be integrated with the globalized economy. It is for the Trump administration and anyone and everyone who is whispering to his ears to sober down and really realize
Absolutely,
that what
Dr.
he is
Monish,
doing.
like you put that into context, that the playbook has changed now, right? It's not just about the US that we're talking about. But let me come back to you, Dr. Monish. Given, taking a cue from what Blanket also pointed out earlier, the aspect of how Trump behaves like a bully, because what we also see just a while ago that Lula da Silva also spoke about how, they're not going to be treated as subordinates. And more importantly, that the US government has been acting like emperors of the earth. How do you really read into that particular statement?
I think it's really a pertinent point, because if you look at at least the recent history of India-US economic ties and trade negotiations, the kind of differences we have had at the WTO. The WTO is anyway irrelevant now. With Trump's insistence on bilateral negotiation with each and every country, he has sort of killed the WTO in a practical sense. So I think what we need to understand is that it is not the first time that India-US trade negotiation is having difficulties. It is not the first time that we are having differences over economic negotiation, but it is the manner in which it is being dealt with, especially from the White House. It is the manner, the rapidity which changes happen without much of consultation. All of these tariffs were slapped at a time when India was ready to negotiate on the trade deal with the United States. The trade negotiation was going on. As I pointed out earlier, we are ready to negotiate with any partner, whether it's the European Union or European countries or the UK or the ASEAN countries, if we speak from a vantage point of equality and respect for each other's interests, not fait accompli that is given from any country. So I think that's really the sticking point. It is also a sticking point because of this Trump tariff and the trade war that is going on. I think there is going to be a long-term strategic impact. So it's not just an economic impact, it's the strategic impact. You already see it in form of how we are trying to talk to Beijing now, so you already see the impact of that. Trust has been broken at the highest level. So it's going to be very difficult from now on how to repair that.
Right. In fact, Monish, the assumption is that the United States might be watching the upcoming SCO summit. and of course the developments that will happen over there very, very closely, because definitely this is not something that Donald Trump anticipated. But let me come to you, Jonah. Now this situation becomes even more complex, and I'm talking about the the US-India relationship, and of course this entire issue of tariffs. It becomes even more complex because you do have the Russia-Ukraine war into the picture as well. So of course everybody's waiting and watching out for whether there's going to be any truce, or at least a beginning will be made so far as peace talks between the two sides are concerned. But given that both sides now need to reach thaw, US and India, do you expect a situation like China to play out for India, where tariff penalty for China was pushed aside for 90 days? And we've been seeing extensions after extensions being given to China. Do you think Trump could consider that sort of a situation for India?
I think he might, because he has absolutely no policy goals regarding India. His reason for slapping India with the highest tariffs of any nation in the world is purely personal pique, personal whim. He was annoyed that India didn't just knuckle under and do what many countries have. Pakistan has been kissing up to him. They nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize, so they got a 19% tariff rather than India's 25% tariff. And then Trump was annoyed, so he slapped another 25% on, allegedly in response to Russia and Ukraine. But look what he did after that. He went to Anchorage, Alaska, and he gave Putin everything that Putin asked for. He has been the strongest supporter of Putin of any nation in the Western world. And then he is punishing India for supporting a position that he himself takes. So there really isn't any seriousness here. I agree with Dr. Manish that trust has been destroyed at a very high level, and I would say it is Donald Trump who is destroying this trust.
In fact, that is a big statement. And circling back to what you said, Manish, that Jonah, of course, is agreed upon as well, that it's not the first time that we've looked at the kind of relation being, having ups and downs and challenges. But the trust has been broken. And we are, of course, looking at this play order change as well. But Dr. Manish, does this, asymmetric treatment push India closer to asserting strategic autonomy as well? And if yes, how do you see that play out?
I think the practice of strategic autonomy has always been there. So, it is not a case of, Trump's shenanigans sort of pushing India to practice strategic autonomy. The real point is, in the last 20 years, despite India's insistence on strategic autonomy, we had always find the strategic rationale to also engage with the United States at every level. It's a multifaceted relationship that has been painstakingly built over the last 20 years, from defense to energy to economy to people-to-people ties to innovation and tech. You just look at even the joint statement that was released right after Prime Minister Modi's visit in February. It's a very multifaceted relationship, but it is also a relationship which requires a certain level of high-level political input and investment. And that is where the problem is coming. Because, when you have high-level political investment from the very highest level, the nuts and bolts issue of the relationship can be straightened out. But if you lose that trust at the very high level, every problem sticks out and every problem becomes much more problematic than it should really be. And I think that's really what we are looking at, that the habits of cooperation that these two countries, these two democracies have built over the last 20 years in the Indo-Pacific, is that going to survive this Trump tornado?
Right, Dr. Monish, and we'll have to see how trust will be rebuilt between the two nations. And of course, many are also watching out for the new hire that Donald Trump has made with respect to South Asia. And of course, we have a new envoy that's going to be coming into India soon, U.S. envoy in India, and we'll have to see how that plays out. But let me ask you another question, and that essentially is on a tariffs impact, because some estimates suggests that the overall exports loss will be to the tune of $20 to $30 billion for India. But India, as it is looking at other markets. China and Russia are also opening up their markets for Indian goods, and diversification drive by the government is currently on. But do you think India will be able to offset that trade impact with the US by diversifying to other markets, or do you think US is too important a market to be sidelined, at least at the moment?
I think it's not really a case of sidelining, Sumita, because everything said and done, the US is still a very important economic partner for India. But the point is, as I said, the point is how much the impact is going to be, how much sectoral impact is going to be, and as we go towards renewing and renegotiating the trade deal, for example, where the services feature in this whole thing, because it's not just about trade and goods and manufactured products. So I think it's a much more complex negotiation which is going to take place. But at the same time, the diversification that you mentioned is already happening. We are already sort of diversifying and talking about new diversification in the ASEAN markets. There is, if I not, you may call it a toe or not a toe, but the Beijing and New Delhi is talking, right? So I think, as I said earlier, in the last 20 years, Indian economy has become a global economy, integrated more so into the Western economies. So it is not just the United States, which is the Western economy. There are many other economies with which we are dealing. I think we are already talking about an FTA. Ursula von, the European Commission president, was very enthusiastic when she visited India that an FTA might sort of fructify very soon. Even if that doesn't, it means that there are other partners, even in the West, who are equally affected by Trump's tariffs and who would like to diversify. And India is a very strong domestic market, which is a plus point for many of the economies in the Western world also. So I think this is already happening. It is just a matter of how we are going to come out of it. Are we just going to weather Trump's tariff in the short term, or are we going to use this as an opportunity to look at diversification from a very long view, to look at, really solidifying and making Indian economy robust from all the indices? Because building self-reliance and Atmanirbharta is not really autarky. It's not the same thing. So I think we are a very globalized economy. We are ready to deal with all kinds of economies, but from a vantage point of equality and sober negotiation.
Dr. Monish, in a sense, that the learnings would perhaps be from the Trump tornado, how we can navigate that. But Jonah, let me come to you. Given the fact that Trump has built his brand on being very tough on China, and yet we're looking at what's happening right now. But how do you think he's reconciling with the fact that the promises he's made to his base? And does that really undercut his own America First message in an election year?
He doesn't care. He does not care at all. His base, that is 33% roughly of the public, will stay with him no matter what. There is no act that Trump could possibly ever do that would lose him the support of that base. After all, just look at what he's done his first term and his second term. If he hasn't lost those people yet, he'll never lose them. The only thing he has to worry about, to the extent he has to worry about anything, is that he's conducting a terrible economic ploy on the American economy. And that eventually will hurt all Americans, including his base. He's never going to have a fair election again. If he ever runs for president again, which he has threatened to do, it would be a blatant violation of the US Constitution, and we would be in a post-democratic future. So he doesn't really have to worry about persuasion. I'm broadcasting right now from Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, which is under the personal occupation of Donald Trump. Troops are out in the street. Federal agents are out in the street. This is not a normal circumstance, and Donald Trump just doesn't care about normal circumstances.
Right. Jonah, so when you say that Donald Trump doesn't really care about these circumstances and the impact that it's going to have on America and Americans, but are these policy measures, are they fueling more cynicism amongst Americans?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. A majority of the American public rejects everything that Trump is doing. He is historically unpopular. One of the only US presidents in modern history who has been as unpopular as Trump 2.0 is Trump 1.0. So these are not actions that have the support of the American people. But under our constitutional frame of government, we don't have much of an answer, much of a response. If the Democrats are able to win in 2026, which I'm not at all optimistic is going to happen, that won't stop Trump because he is not reliant on Congress. Everything he is doing against the wishes of the American public without Congress and without the courts, many of whose members he has personally appointed supporting him. So we have to be realistic about what we're facing here. The American system is in crisis, and we don't have a good mechanism for correcting it.
You know, as you pointed out, Dr. Monish, I do see that in a sense you're agreeing with that viewpoint as well.
I think, see, kind of, taking off from Jonah's point, I think American social contract is going through an inflection point in itself. I think the relationship between the states and the federal government, the relationship between the federal government and the people of America, the relationship between the executive and the legislature, and also the judiciary, these are all going through a big churn. As we speak, I think even the law that Trump has used to push these tariffs on so many countries, including India, is being challenged in a New York court. I do not know what is going to be the outcome of that and what are the alternatives that the Trump administration is going to use as a legal point to impose tariffs on all these countries. What I'm trying to say is that we have to really see Trump's presidency from the point of how he is dealing with many of these issues which are domestic in nature and the kind of pushback that he's getting through legal court cases and other things, and also contrast it with the kind of power he's exercising on foreign policy issues, where the American legislature and the American people might have relatively less control over how the executive functions. So I think all of this are going through a big churn in terms of the deployment of the presidential power. So in that sense, I think Trump 2.0 and Trump 1.0 as well is going to be studied in posterity as one of the most significant phases in modern American presidency, and the way in which the executive and the president himself is exercising power in both domestic issues and also on foreign policy issues. And also it's going to be a really inflection point in terms of how you're going to look at the future of American primacy, or you may call it American power. And it's radically changing America's terms of engagement with the rest of the world, including the transatlantic alliance is in a big rupture, the kind of which we have never seen in the post-World War II era. And that is going to have a huge impact on how other countries are going to look at America in terms of rebooting and recalibrating their ties with America, and in terms of really sort of changing the playbook and lens through which they are going to see how do they deal with America. And India is not different. We are going through the same phase.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Dr. Monish, and that move away from America to, of course, nations having their own individual ties with countries, and of course, you do have BRICS as a counterpart that's only getting strengthened. Those developments are also currently underway. But let me come to you, Jonah, now that we talk of impact on the Americans, on the American electorate. Now, let me also bring in this point of this additional duty. Now, even though Donald Trump has put this additional 25% on duty on India due to its energy trade with Russia, but wouldn't stopping that this trade with Russia that India has backfired, given that oil prices would jump, and hence the question is, does Trump have the stomach to raise prices for U.S. consumers? Because it's going to backfire.
Yes, you're right. However, he clearly doesn't care. First off, he genuinely believes that tariffs are paid by other countries. He's wrong. 100 out of 100 economists would tell him he's wrong. But Donald Trump doesn't understand economics. He simply has deeply uninformed views of the world, and he will not be budged from them. So he thinks that tariffs are bringing money into America when in fact they are a tax on American consumers and businesses. Will he change his views simply because it spurs inflation in America? No, he won't. He's already shown that his response to bad economic numbers is to fire the officials who create the economic numbers. And now, just this morning, he announced that he is firing a governor of the Fed. Now, this sounds a little bit nerdy economic, but it's really important. What he's trying to do is to simply force the independent Federal Reserve Bank to bring down interest rates. And as any economist will tell you, this is a disaster. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It will happen in the near future. What does he care about this? He may care about the bond market. That was what got him to edge off his tariffs in April. So it's possible that the economic impact of the bond market, not on actual real people, but the bond market may force him to come back a bit. But let's remember that he's not looking to run in another fair election. He's looking to take power and keep power rather than to win power.
And that's the essence of it, and which is why we're looking at the way this has been panning out. But Jonah and Dr. Monish, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out, joining us this evening on India Tonight. But for the moment, we leave the conversation at that. But we continue to put in focus a lot more developments on India Tonight. But what is Wall Street